Hello, everybody. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Everyone's cameras and microphones are turned off for the duration of the webinar, but please feel free to ask your questions throughout the webinar at your volition in the Q&A. So there's a button at the top of the screen that says Q&A, and that's the Q&A. So again, well, I'm in Edmonton, so good morning from me. If you're on the east side of the country, good afternoon. Welcome to the CCLM Community Climate Change Adaptation webinar. My name is Dasvinder Kambo. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that I'm video calling from a land which goes by many names. We're located on the Enoch Cree Nation Treaty 6 territory, traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. I also acknowledge the many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. As I said, I'm located in Edmonton in Alberta, and we're also known as the Gateway to the North. And I would like to recognize this land and this statement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those territories my family currently resides in. So thank you, everyone, again, for joining us again for this important discussion. Before we jump into the webinar itself, I just want to say a few words about the CCLM, the Canadian Conservation and Land Management portal. I am hopeful that everyone on the call today has had an opportunity to at least visit or utilize the site. The CCLM itself was launched back in April 2020, so a few years ago now, and was built with the vision to connect practitioners across Canada's diverse landscapes to current and relevant resources, like utilized and applied resources. In 2019, so a year before the official launch, 5 collaborating organizations came together and identified that there was no central place to share and exchange vital information and learnings about conservation and land reclamation. The founding members included Inotech Alberta, ECCC, so Environment Canada, representing the National Boreal Caribou Knowledge Consortium, Natural Resources Canada, specifically the Canadian Forest Service, Ducks Unlimited Canada, and the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, or NATE, specifically their Centre of Boreal Research. I also want to thank our other supporters that have kept the CCLM portal active and growing. These are organizations such as Pathways Alliance, Alberta Innovates, the Grand Prairie Regional Innovation Network, Alberta Land Use Knowledge Network, the Northern Caribou Canada portal, and Fuse Consulting. The result of this collaboration has been to create this powerful go-to site for all things related to conservation and land management. So we have over 3,600 resources within the portal, and this number grows daily, weekly, and we have grown our membership quite a bit too. It has 4 major hubs, as you can see on the screen right now, and we have welcomed, I think, over 100,000 users since it was launched. So it's a pretty big site. Now, if you're thinking, hey, this is pretty cool, I want to be part of this, or I want my resources linked in this tool, please feel free to reach out after the call, and we'll figure out how you can be best part of the CCLM. So now, we're pleased to be hosting today's webinar on Community Climate Change Adaptation. Joining us today are Robert Chapman, Aaron Fraser-Reed, and Kasia Tolwinski, with presentations specifically from Robert and Aaron. Following the presentations, we'll host a moderated Q&A from the questions in the Q&A. And during that time, you'll have the opportunity to ask Robert, Aaron, or Kasia any questions you so choose, hopefully related to the presentations. As I mentioned earlier, please pose any questions as you might as you have in the Q&A, or feel free to write them down on and then post them in the Q&A when we're getting started. Today's webinar itself is going to be moderated by Shala. Shala is the director of the Knowledge Exchange Partnerships with Fuse Consulting. So she's, I think, first on my screen. And she's been involved with the CCLM since the very beginning. So, hi, Shala. All right, let's go ahead and jump kind of right into it. Our first presentation is going to be from Robert Chapman. So Rob is the manager for strategic policy at the Canadian Forest Service, which he joined in the summer of 2024 after spending 3 years working on agriculture programming. Robert lives on a small 2.5-acre urban forest just south of Ottawa, where he raises bees and a small flock of chickens. So Robert, I'm going to pass the buck over to you. Thank you.
Asminder, for me, it's good afternoon. Maybe it's good morning for you, but welcome to the presentation. I'll start with a land acknowledgement. So I am presenting today from Ottawa, and so I acknowledge that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, or nation. Today, I'm honoring the peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation who have lived here for generations, and I recognize and respect their enduring relationship with this land. Next slide, please. So I thought I would start off by just talking about why do urban forests matter? And often when we talk about the benefits of urban trees and urban forests, we identify their value in providing what we call ecosystem services in order to show the breadth and depth of the value that forests provide for people and the environment. Ecosystem services are the benefits that people obtain from nature. They describe all the ways that ecosystems like forests, wetlands, oceans support human well-being. Within the realm of ecosystem services, we can go a little bit further and consider, at a more detailed level, some of the benefits. So there are provisioning services. So these are urban trees that provide food. I live near a conservation area called the Baxter Conservation Area, just south of Ottawa. And there's a nut grove where foragers can visit every fall. And it's quite a nice place to take a walk and to explore. There are regulating services. These include water and climate regulation and mitigation of flooding risks. I'll go into more detail about this later because the CFS has recently released a science policy note on the regulating value of urban trees. There are supporting services, which are services that enable ecosystems to function properly, including soil formation and habitat formation. And then finally, there's cultural and social services. And this simply describes the value that we all place on having opportunities to be in nature. Before I move on to the next slide, I want to point out too that the 2025 speech from the throne noted that nature is core to Canada's identity. And I think this is a really, a good point made in the speech from the throne. And it's certainly a strong vision. But if I were to go deeper and think about more of a mission statement for the Canadian Forest Service, I would say that our mission statement is to promote investments in urban trees that support communities and community building with an emphasis on livability. Next slide, please. I'm going to briefly talk about forest jurisdiction and governance. So forest management is first and foremost a provincial and territorial jurisdiction. So as part of the federal government, the Canadian Forest Service's policies and programs support, among other goals, conservation, science and research, health and safety, Indigenous reconciliation, and more. One example of shared jurisdiction that is relevant to our work is wildland fire and how this relates to remote communities and to the management of what we call the wildland urban interface. To this end, I'll point out that the Fire Smart program, which receives funding from NRCan, provides guidance to communities on selecting, placing, and maintaining trees in a way that reduces wildfire risk while supporting healthy and resilient neighborhood landscapes. And finally, I'll note that this is just one of many ways that our research, our advocacy, and communication efforts help support effective, locally led climate adaptation strategies, in this case, to a changing wildfire landscape. Next slide, please. Our priority as a federal urban forest focused team is to better integrate urban forests and near urban forests in both federal research and federal policy. We bring in expertise in picking the right tree for the right place, with guidance on tree health and tree care. This can include concepts that maybe we sometimes take for granted, like whether to create a mulch well around trees in urban spaces, which is not always the appropriate practice and must be done with care. Bringing urban forestry into the larger forestry conversation has been something that a previous member of our team, dendrologist and new retiree Ken Farr, has worked at for more than a decade. And we're fortunate now that our certified forester, Aileen Duncan, is carrying the torch to continue to advocate for urban forests and build off the work that Ken Farr did. We are still a very small team, but I think we're quite influential. We think our evidence to support advocacy is overwhelming and convincing. Our work intersects very well with the need for both climate adaptation and resilience. And in fact, urban forestry is uniquely identified as an adaptation measure in Canada's National Adaptation Strategy. The National Adaptation Strategy notes that urban forests in the city of Toronto can generate $3.20 for every $1 invested by lowering cooling costs, improving air quality, and reducing strains on stormwater infrastructure. In the right panel, I've identified some of our key activities that we do. And I'll just give you a recent example of how we collaborate with our external partners. We meet annually with our counterparts from the Korean government to share research and information. And recently they presented data observed in Korean urban centers that looks at the impact of urban forests on reducing industrial particulate matter concentrations in dense residential urban areas, and then the subsequent impact on the number of asthma care hospital visits. And this kind of collaboration is important because it can start to maybe give us the curiosity to explore similar research. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about the definition of urban and near urban forests. We've kind of taken it upon ourselves at the CFS to create a new definition that's inclusive of all communities in Canada. So to us, urban forests encompass urban centers, residential communities, industrial commercial areas, riparian shorelines, and even rural communities. With that, our working definition attempts to be quite broad. And so I would say that, urban and near urban forest science studies the trees and wooded natural spaces within and nearby to settled areas, including their uses, management, and resilience for economic, social, and public health benefits. In this sense, urban is a gradient, it's not binary. When managing the urban forest, consideration for how people and communities interact with forests and trees is as important as the forests themselves. We bring in rural and remote communities into our research and advocacy because these communities have unique adaptation needs that we must consider. Next slide, please. I think I'll just go by the numbers. So we're involved in 148 unique funded research projects. Some were funded for just 1 year, others for multiple years. The cumulative funding is about $10.4 million, which is about 30% of all science funding. I've included these pie charts on the right. Those represent the comparison between urban forest projects to non-urban forest projects in 3 of our research hubs. I'll note here, some of you will have heard that in budget 2025, there was an announcement that the 2 Billion Trees program will be wound down. But I'll emphasize that existing funding commitments for planting approximately 1 billion trees under this program will continue. With that, it's one thing to see the numbers, but let's look at a few examples of some of our science. So next slide, please. The first case study for CFS Urban Science is the updates to the plant hardiness zones. And for any of you who are gardeners, I hope you've had a chance to take advantage of this. These were released last year. So Dan McKenney who I'm proud to say is a fellow economist, and John Pedlar have recently updated Canada's plant hardiness zones, which are maps and national guidelines that show what vegetation can survive in different areas based on maximum and minimum temperatures and other measurements. This was the first update in 10 years, and we've seen some big shifts in certain areas, up to 2 whole zones in parts of Canada's north. Canada's revised plant hardiness zones have been met with enthusiasm from forest managers and gardeners alike, who appreciate the more accurate climate-informed guidance that is already helping them make better planting and management decisions. The next example is related to AI and urban forest mapping. So the CFS, along with the Canadian Centre for Mapping and Earth Observation, are doing research to assess the potential of artificial intelligence applied to satellite imagery to help develop urban forest inventories. The importance of this work is that we'll have access to more accurate urban forest inventories to enhance our research on the ecosystem benefits of urban forests. For example, this could enable us to do complementary work to the research I described earlier that the Korean government presented on the positive impacts of urban forests to reduce particulate matter and by extension, improving health outcomes. Next slide, please. Next thing I'll touch on is more related to policy. And so we recently released and published a new, what we call a science policy note on the cooling effect of urban trees. And here we are highlighting how trees can act as nature's air conditioning. This is meant to be a short and simple explanation for a non-technical audience of how trees cool cities. In our publication, we note that strategic planning, tree protection, and ensuring trees grow to maturity can mitigate urban heat and locally decrease air temperatures by 3 to 6 degrees Celsius. We created several infographics as part of this note, including 2 that are featured here on this slide, and with the hopes that these help just influence the discussion and make communication of the benefits of urban trees a bit easier to understand. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about policy and programming as well, in particular collaboration for investments in natural infrastructure. So to start, I want to recognize that urban forests belong to the set of natural infrastructure tools that can replace gray infrastructure for adaptation to hazards like flooding. Other tools could be wetlands, restored floodplains, and vegetated buffers along rivers. So in the right panel, I'm trying to show a little bit the economic, social, and environmental benefits of natural infrastructure that gray infrastructure can't provide. Natural infrastructure supports the economy, and in fact, natural infrastructure can be cheaper than gray infrastructure. It protects the environment, and it enhances community well-being and livability, which can be as simple as having forests and green spaces for kids to play in. But let's bring this back to policy. So the delivery of natural infrastructure funding from a federal perspective largely rests with Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada. And through the Natural Infrastructure Fund that they deliver, municipalities are already making investments in natural infrastructure. There's also the Build Canada Homes Initiative, which is a newly established federal housing agency launched in mid-2025 to accelerate the delivery of affordable and mixed market housing. And here we see an opportunity to promote community building with more attention to urban trees and urban forests. And finally, there's the Build Communities Strong Fund. This fund was launched in Budget 2025, and it's aimed at revitalizing local infrastructure. Among other things, it aims to replace aging water and wastewater systems through investments in stormwater and flood resilience, to which urban trees could potentially have a role. From a CFS perspective, our priority is to advocate for urban trees as a natural infrastructure tool when building communities and affordable housing. In addition, we've been building networks. We're bringing together experts as part of our urban forest community of practice, where we talk about guidance, standards, and best practices for investing in urban forests. And with this in mind, we hope to have a positive influence on livability and adaptation as these in support of these federal initiatives. Next slide, please. To go a little bit further on collaboration, I've already noted our community of practice. So we co-chair the community of practice on urban forestry with Health Canada. We meet every 2 to 3 times a year, and we've held about 15 meetings so far. It's a fantastic forum for dialogue and collaboration related to nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure, and urban forestry. We connect researchers with policy and program-focused teams with the intent of encouraging collaboration and evidence-based decision-making. The next aspect, or the next collaboration would be the Canadian Urban Forest Conference. We're helping to organize the next edition of the conference, which is taking place in October 2026 in Quebec City. And I'll put this out there for all the participants today. If you or your network are interested in participating or presenting at the conference, the request for proposals is currently open. And so, hopefully we'll have a chance to connect there in the fall. Next slide, please. I'm going to just really briefly note that we also are promoting urban forests and sparking curiosity about trees in the minds of the public, and this is very important to us. So our communications and outreach is a very key aspect of what we do. Experiences in and around nature are a driving reason that people get involved in the conservation and forestry sectors. And a healthy urban forest inspires curiosity in ecology, construction, architecture, and STEM. So we think it's important to share news and fun facts about trees, and we have a wonderful communications team that supports this work. Next slide, please. Another area where we are working is in collaboration with our counterparts in Mexico and the US on a peer review for an update to the guide on silviculture in North America. The key change to this upcoming edition is that we're intending to expand the number of species to include exotic and invasive species rather than just native species. And what's really important is there will be a section on urban forestry added for each tree species that is identified in this guide. Our team is the Canadian representative coordinating the reviews of the urban forest sections that will be included in the next edition. We have a good amount of peer reviewers, but once again, I'll solicit your interest for anyone who wants to participate. We can always accommodate more, anyone who's interested in being a peer reviewer of the content that will go in the next edition. We also are looking for volunteer authors to draft chapters. There are a good amount of tree species where authors have not been identified, and the full list is available on the Silvix website, and we can share that as well. Next slide. So that's about it for my presentation. As a last slide, I've identified a few international areas where we collaborate. These are largely related to biodiversity, protection of nature, and conservation of nature. We do have a role there, and it's quite an interesting space to be in. I won't get into too much of the details as I'm kind of coming up on time. But I do want to thank everybody for joining today, and feel free to ask any questions, but I'll turn it back to you, Desvinder.
Thank you.
Maybe actually, yeah, thanks. I'll just note, we did include our contact here, and we always welcome any interest, any questions. Please use this email address. We'd love to interact with you and help share more about our advocacy work around urban forests. So anyways, thank you again. Desvinder, back to you.
Thanks, Robert. I really appreciate your presentation. If anyone has questions, again, feel free to put it in the Q&A and we'll go through it after the second presentation. which is a great segue, actually. So our second presentation will be from Erin Fraser-Reid. Erin is the Climate Change Adaptation Lead at the Canadian Forest Service, specifically in the Northern Forestry Centre here in Edmonton. I say here in Edmonton because I'm in Edmonton right now, not because everything is in Edmonton. But she is also in Edmonton. Prior to taking on this role in Edmonton, Erin spent 13 years working for the Alberta government as a senior reforestation specialist, where she focused on applied reforestation and reclamation research and science policy integration. So Erin holds a PhD and a master's both in forest ecology and management from the University of Alberta, a bachelor's in natural resource management from the University of Northern British Columbia, and a technical diploma in forestry from the British Columbia Institute of Technology. So Erin has been a registered professional forester in Alberta since 2002. So Erin, over to you.
Great, thank you for that introduction, Desvinder. Yeah, there we go. So hello, everyone. And I am here today to just give you a very quick introduction to a new guidebook that Natural Resources Canada is about to release called the Climate Change Adaptation Guidebook for Forest-Based Communities. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone on this call here today, but Canada's climate is changing. We're already seeing rising temperatures, shorter winters, stronger and more frequent extreme storms, as well as changing precipitation patterns. And we're seeing these changes across the country, and these are affecting all of us already, regardless of the size of the community that we live in. Next slide, please. However, small forest-based communities can be especially vulnerable to these types of changes. First of all, they are physically close to the forest, so they are much more affected by changes in forest condition than urban centers would be. Also, the residents of these communities are often quite connected to forests for their employment, recreation, sustenance, and general quality of life, and often more so, again, than folks who live in larger urban centers. These communities can also sometimes be quite isolated with few municipal services. And by that, I mean they may not have a municipal planning department that would undertake adaptation planning on behalf of the community. Next slide, please. For those reasons, Natural Resources Canada has developed a community adaptation guidebook that is specifically geared towards forest-based communities. These are a few of the sort of general guiding principles of the guidebook. And so probably first and foremost, it is a process that is meant to be led by community residents for their community. So there is no need to bring in an external facilitator to lead this process. The guidebook was written in plain language, and it includes lots of explanation and links to resources for further information. It does take a vulnerability assessment approach. So that just means it will take residents through a process to help them understand which climate changes are likely to happen in their region, how those changes could affect the places and things that local people value, and then how the community could realistically deal with those changes. And because this is a plan that's being developed by the community for the community, of course, community feedback throughout this process is super critical. The process described in the guidebook really emphasizes feasibility for the community, otherwise known as adaptive capacity. So that just means that refers to the ability of the community to undertake work like this and to make changes. And that will be different for each community. So that is why the guidebook is super flexible, and there's definitely no one-size-fits-all approach. It's not a cookbook, and it doesn't have like drop-down lists where you can pick one of 8 options or anything like that. It's extremely flexible. So this guidebook itself, it's sort of about half describes the process, and then the other half is a compendium of resources where folks can go to learn more, to see case studies, examples from other communities, and so on. So I guess all that to say that this guidebook is really centered around the belief that no one knows small communities better than the people who live there. Next slide, please. So this is the whole guidebook process. You can see that there's 9 steps. That may seem like a lot, but since I mentioned this process here is meant to be led and participated in by what I call regular people. So just meaning folks who may not have a background in science or climate change or community planning and so on. The process has been broken down into more steps than you would typically see in a guidebook like this that might be geared towards municipal planners, for example. I'll just say it's basically, I broke it down into small, we'll call them like bite-sized steps. I'm not going to go through each of these 9 steps today. Next slide, please. But I have broken them down into 4 phases. So I will describe each phase for you here today, but I'm going to do that fairly generally. So I will be glossing over a lot in this presentation. So if anyone is interested in a deeper dive into the details here, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be more than happy to meet one-on-one or with groups who would like to learn more. And so as I go through the phases, I have listed all the guidebook steps that are included in each phase in case anybody is interested in that. Next slide, please. So the first phase is getting started, and that includes 3 steps, the first of which would be to identify a community champion. And so this is not someone who's going to do the plan by themselves or anything like that. I would equate them more to being like a committee chair. It can be a small group or a person, depending on what works, but they should be an inclusive, motivated, well-connected local person who understands their community. So once that person or group has been identified, then they would start to work on generating community interest. And so what that would mean is just learning a little bit about what are the predicted changes for the region, and do a little bit of brainstorming about what those changes might mean for the community and the community's values and priorities. Could also brainstorm some potential community benefits of completing a plan like this, and basically use all of that information to pique people's interest in participating, either just to provide feedback on the plan or also to recruit people to be part of the plan development team. So after that would begin the process, which was basically just finalizing all our ducks in a row here, finalizing our team membership, and then also importantly, determining the scope of this plan. So the guidebook was written for a full adaptation plan. So it's suited for that, but it is also suited for a much more narrow plan. If the community's adaptive capacity maybe indicates that a more narrow plan would be appropriate, the guidebook could work for that too. Just as an example, maybe the community has been recently affected by some climate-related changes. Maybe part of the community has flooded, or maybe wildfires are encroaching ever closer to the community, and that has people worried. So the guidebook could be used for a narrow plan or a full plan. And again, it should be centered around what's reasonable for the community. Next slide. So after getting everybody enthused and excited to begin, then the work would begin to start identifying potential impacts on the community. That includes 2 steps. So first of which would be the community champion starting to reach out to community members and stakeholders to just understand what they've seen so far in terms of climate-related changes in the community and the local forests. And at this stage, some people will notice the climate changes themselves, like, for example, first frost date in the fall is much later than it used to be. Other people will notice the impacts of those changes, like my apple tree produces a lot more apples than it used to. And that's all great. Those are all important observations. So the community champion would start to learn like that. And then they would also do a bit of a deeper dive into the science. So what does the local climate data say, historic versus current? What are the climate projections for the region? And from there, that information would be combined with feedback from the community to determine what are the highest priority climate changes for the community. As I'm sure you're all aware, the potential climate changes that could be considered in a process like this could include annual or seasonal temperatures, hottest or coldest day, humidex, snow or rainfall amounts, growing season lengths, freeze up or break up timing, sea level changes, and on and on. But obviously, all of those changes are not going to affect each community equally. So this is just the point where the community would determine which of those changes are likely to have the most impact. And after that, then those priority impacts would be investigated a little bit deeper in step 5, where the planning team would start to understand how the local forest and community could be affected by those highest priority climate changes. And this process will result in a climate change impact inventory. I realize that might be a bit of a confusing explanation. So next slide, please. I will show you an example. So this is an example hypothetical partial climate change impact inventory shown here. So in the teal column on the left, warmer temperatures and less rain were identified as the top priority climate changes to this hypothetical community. From there would be brainstorming on ecosystem responses, which is the middle green column here. So, for example, warmer temperatures are expected to lead to increased evaporation, drier plants and soils, and higher wildfire hazards, for example. Once that brainstorming has been completed or near completed, then the next step would be to figure out what those changes would mean for the community itself and people's quality of life. So in this example, again, higher wildfire hazard could lead to more interface fires or fires that burn both the forest and community infrastructure. It could lead to smoke and other disruption, as well as potential water demand issues if local water sources are needed to fight a fire, for example. So all of the items that would populate this purple column would be the climate change impact inventory for the community. Next slide, please. So once the impact inventory has been developed, it's now time to prioritize those impacts, because everything in that purple column on the previous slide will not affect the community equally. So each potential impact would be assessed for likelihood and consequence by the community. And that just means relative to each other. There's no need to engage an engineer or look at return intervals or anything like that. It's all relative. And again, the community would need to decide where the impact and consequence, or the likelihood and consequence, are for each of these potential impacts. And from there, some top priorities will be identified. And those can be identified any number of different ways. You know, it could be the highest potential risk or benefit to the community, the potential to cause the most damage to the community in either the short or long term, the time and resources required to address the issue, community interest, you know, whatever. Again, this is a process driven by the community. But however the top priority impacts are determined, those impacts would then move on to step 7, where adaptation options would start to be developed. And so this would be a brainstorming and prioritization, again, with the community to figure out how best to address those high priority impacts. And then also critically at this stage, assigning responsibility for implementation would be part of this step. Next slide, please. At this point, we arrive at the compile and implement phase of the plan development. And yeah, step 8 is to compile the plan. And that just means bringing all the information and feedback that has been gathered throughout this process so far together and into the plan. So the guidebook was specifically written so that by the time users arrive at the compile the plan step, it's pretty much done, because yeah, this is everything that's been worked on up to this point. So acknowledge I did not cover all of these bubbles here in my talk, but again, if folks have questions, I can definitely happy to answer them. Next, please. So the final step, arguably the most important of all steps, is the implementation phase. I'm sure we all know that you can make the world's greatest plan, but if it sits on the shelf and is never implemented, it's not such a great plan. So yeah, implementation and monitoring are critical. This is the process diagram again. I wanted to highlight just to show the adaptive nature of adaptation planning. You can see that as you move through the process from steps 1 to 9, there's an arrow leading right back into step 1, which is just to highlight again, all the learnings and feedback that you learned should inform the next version of the plan. And then there's just a few questions there on the slide, which might indicate when it could be time for the community to revisit their plan. Next slide, please. So we expect to release this guidebook in about February or March of this year. If you'd like to be notified when it is released, please let me know and I will add you to my distribution list. My contact information is there. I also did want to mention that while this guidebook was developed based on extensive research, review of other guidebooks, conversations with experts and communities, and case studies, and so on, it has never actually been tested. And I would really like to do that. So if you know of a community who might be interested in pilot testing this approach, please let me know. I'd love to talk about that. And then I think next slide. Thank you. That is it from me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Erin. Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation, Erin, and for the introduction to the guidebook. Again, I want to thank both our presenters, both Robert and Erin. Before I pass the microphone, or I suppose there's no microphone actually being passed, but before I pass it over to Shala, I wanted to mention that a survey for the webinar will also be placed in the Q&A session, in the Q&A checkbox over there. So in the survey, you can submit requests for future topics and request to be contacted for more information about the CCLM. So before I pass it over to Shala to moderate the Q&A, I just wanted to reintroduce Shala because it's been a little bit of time since the start of this webinar. So Shala is the director of the Knowledge Exchange Partnership with Fuse Consulting, and she's been involved with CCLM since the very beginning. So Shala, I'm going to pass it over to you for the Q&A moderation session.
Thanks so much, Tazavinder, and thank you, Erin and Rob, for presenting. We actually were honored to have a third panelist joining us to receive some questions. So I'd just like to briefly introduce her. Kasia Tolwinski is a policy analyst working in the Science Policy Integration branch of the Canadian Forest Service on strategic policy, science policy, and urban forestry. She has a doctoral degree in the sociology of science, and she's here to also answer any technical questions that participants may have. Thank you so much, Lynn Palmer, for providing our first question in the Q&A. I'll read your question, Lynn, and I think maybe if Rob, you want to take the first go at that question, and then Erin, you can probably also highlight how much uptake or implementation you've experienced from municipalities. So Lynn's question is, given that municipalities for the most part have jurisdiction for urban forests, is the CFS urban forestry work getting uptake and implementation by many municipalities?
It's a fantastic question. So thanks, Lynn. I think I can give my answer in two parts. Yes, and there's more to come. So in terms of yes, the uptake of the Natural Infrastructure Fund has been very strong. And you can look at the City of Vancouver recently implemented its Rain City strategy, which includes landscaping elements to capture, filter, and slow rainwater. And that involves the use of urban trees as one of the green infrastructure tools. And it's so far has proven quite successful. In terms of what's to come, with the increasing severity of forest fires, communities are at a heightened risk. And the Standards Council of Canada is committed to come forward with new guidance and standards for how communities can be more resilient faced with increased forest fire risks. And that will include vegetation management and management for the wildland-urban interface, which includes, how urban trees are planted and managed. So I think there's still more to come as hazards get increasingly severe and frequent. But there's been a lot of success stories up till now, particularly through the Natural Infrastructure Fund. So, Aaron, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, oh, sorry, having a little glitch there. Yeah, in terms of municipalities having the jurisdiction for urban forests, yeah, our guidebook here is meant for, smaller communities to look within their communities as well as outside, understanding, of course, that the communities don't really have jurisdiction over the forests that are outside their communities, understanding that, of course, but going through a plan, like a community planning process can hold a lot of weight if maybe municipalities wanted to lobby the province or the local forestry companies to address areas of concern outside of the community. But yeah, the jurisdiction certainly is with the municipalities or communities themselves.
And Aaron, as you did your research for the guidebook and gathered the case studies that you mentioned, do you think there is quite a bit of reliance on science? Like, are municipalities looking for research as their evidence as they start to do some of their own projects?
Well, when I did my guidebook, I tried not to look too much at what the big cities are doing because I don't know that they're necessarily a good example for what small communities can do, because of course they have robust municipal planning departments with experts, scientists, and so on staff. So yes, the guidebook it's a compendium of resources. It's meant to help folks kind of think through those topics themselves, because I mean, a lot of it isn't rocket science, but it might be unfamiliar. So yeah.
Great. I think I'm going to use one of these prepared questions and then we'll come back to these because it kind of ties into what you were just saying. So can you tell us more what inspired the development of the new Community Climate Action Adaptation guidebook and what gap does it aim to fill for communities?
Well, it does aim to fill or to enable them or empower them to sort of take the reins on adaptation planning, because it's not a super well-resourced area in a lot of jurisdictions. And so waiting for a higher order of government to take it on, that may not happen. And then again, with there are some communities that have undertaken this, but I know they've relied on external facilitators because it seems really complicated. And a lot of the existing guidebooks, my guidebook has 9 steps. A lot of the other ones have 4. So they make a lot of leaps in terms of what people already know. And so I tried not to make that leap, basically, and tried to just, not obviously not talk down to people, but just provide the resources of where folks could learn a bit about this, and just with it being centered on what's important for the community, almost, I mean, not more so than science, but basically looking at the science through the lens of what is important for the community. And in terms of what prompted this, well, I will say that this idea has actually been floating around NRCan since at least 2011, because there was a draft forest-based community guidebook that was developed back then. It was never released, and I'm not sure why. I wasn't with the government at that time. But it was recognized that that is a gap that we needed or we were going to fill. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure how realistic this is for some communities. I'm sure this is probably too much for some communities, and maybe they would still prefer to hire an external facilitator to take them through. But for the communities where they feel they could undertake this, it's a resource that's available if folks are interested.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Now a question for Robert or Kasha, or both of you can weigh in. It's more based on costs associated with urban forestry, which is significantly higher when compared to regular reforestation, but the utility of forestry in urban environments is a lot higher. How do we deal with that? It's hard for municipalities to face the costs of urban forestry, but provincial and federal funding is sometimes episodic. Do you want to speak to sort of what can happen to support urban forestry in Canada?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, this is a good question, and this has the timing for this question is really good. So let's put this in the context of the Build Canada Homes initiative. So that's an initiative that will use federal land in urban centers to build affordable housing. Well, right away, we can work with our federal partners to try and support, to promote and advocate for urban forests on those federal lands. And so that's a new avenue that we're exploring right now to help mitigate the costs for municipalities. Beyond that, I will admit there are costs to urban tree planting. And one of the concerns, Aileen Duncan, our forester, often talks about this. It's not enough to plant a tree and have it surrounded by gray around it, right? Have it surrounded by cement. It doesn't thrive in that environment. And so there are costs, but to us, the impetus for us is how do we communicate the benefits so that municipalities understand that over the long term, these are investments that have a bigger payoff than maybe that initial cost, right? Whether that's in terms of health implications or cooling of cities and that. And that really gets to the purpose of our science policy note. That's how we communicate in a non-technical way these benefits with the hope that it improves uptake in municipalities. So,
thanks, Kasha. Do you have anything to add there?
I'll echo what Rob said on the benefits, trying to make clear that the benefits of urban forests are significant and that natural infrastructure is a great return on investment. So maybe flipping the conversation to talk about ROI as opposed to initial upfront costs. There are going to be costs for cities with arborists and for planting and maintenance. But remember that urban trees aren't only those trees on streets. These are trees also in your backyard. So myself, I've planted, if you have a backyard, I've planted a number of trees there. That does go on to the individual person, but we can encourage people to do that. And additionally, these are trees in riparian areas, by the rivers, into close to agricultural land. So it's not all about planting, it's about helping maintain and keep those trees healthy that are in areas that aren't just in the city. Because I think some people do think those urban trees are just the ones that are by your parking spot, which it really is a lot more than that. So it might be less expensive than it appears on first glance, but it is an investment.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned maintaining some of those important trees. Can you speak to the unique challenges that urban forests face as climate impacts intensify? And then we'll have Rob and Aaron speak to that same question.
Yeah, so I'll just start with saying that urban trees actually face some unique challenges just by virtue of being in urban centers. So that's they don't have a lot of soil to grow in, and that can harm them. Pollution is an issue. Other things like snowplows, animals, that all harms the trees in the urban setting. So we do have to make efforts to take care of them. Just even without the effects of climate change. In terms of climate change, you know, what the biggest issues are is this, you know, changing weather. And these may no longer be an appropriate climate for these trees, changing patterns of precipitation. You know, these all lead to tree failure and sometimes death. So it's also another issue is this vulnerability to invasive insects. So we're getting more insects, plants, and diseases, non-native pests and pathogens, because these trees haven't evolved to resist them. So if we're getting new pests, new diseases, that can harm things. So it's like our emerald ash borer. There's a real problem now because those trees are dying due to this. So yeah, it's Dutch elm disease, Asian longhorn beetle, and like I said, emerald ash borer. And then, so one of the things we can do is instead of just planting all elm, you can plant different kinds of trees. So really, I think what we're trying to say is like proactive planting for urban trees and in communities is going to help long term with these problems. So I was in Winnipeg for the last urban forestry conference, and there are a whole bunch of elm and I think ash that have just been decimated. So that changes the canopy of neighborhoods. We used to have these beautiful canopies on these streets, and those are no more. So just not having, you know, a monoculture within the urban forest is really important. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Rob, over to you. Any unique challenges that urban forests face as climate impacts intensify? And if you have suggestions, like Kasia sort of mentioned, those adaptation parts as well.
No, I'll just echo that the emphasis on proactive planning that Kasia gets. So I think that's really important if you're thinking if you want to mitigate those maintenance costs. But yeah, I think Kasia nailed it on the head there. Yeah.
Thanks. Aaron, do you have anything to add about the unique challenges urban forests face as climate impacts intensify?
No, I think Kasia's answer was great. I honestly have nothing to add.
Okay, thanks so much. I think you've touched on this a little bit, but I'm just curious to dive a little deeper into these nature-based solutions and how you can demonstrate that it is worth the investment for a municipality. So, you know, maybe speak a little bit about your challenges in demonstrating how urban forests and more broadly other nature-based solutions are essential to building resilient and thriving communities. And I really liked Rob's whole graph of all the different ways that they're showing benefits. But do you want to speak? And maybe we'll start with you, Rob, of some challenges that you've faced in trying to demonstrate those benefits.
I guess this is a tricky one, but the overwhelming challenge is that gray infrastructure is easy. There are teams in place that are ready to do this, right? And so the real challenge, and this gets back to our science and our research function, is how do we communicate the benefits, not just the upfront cost savings of green infrastructure and natural infrastructure, but the benefits over the long term. I think that's, you know, that really is our challenge, and we're looking at lots of different ways to do that. Yeah, I don't have much more than that. To me, it's a communication thing. I mean, yeah, go ahead, Kasia, if you want to jump in.
I think these are good questions, and it also goes to Kristen Clark's question about demonstrating value. And so what I think has happened is it's taken a long time for urban forests to find a place even in the Canadian Forest Service. And that was done by the work of Ken Farr for over 10 years. So it's been an effort, and it's an ongoing effort where lots of people are having conversations at a lot of levels and networking like we are in this space. It's also communicating our science. So Heather McDonald is doing work on the health impacts of greater tree canopy, and that AI tree inventory work is going towards that. So we can have data upon which to say, okay, when you have more canopy in Canada, this is how it is. So I believe there's a study of the US where urban forestry or green spaces, including urban forests, have been shown to decrease all causes of mortality, physical and mental, by, I can't remember if it's 30%, but it's something really significant. So right now, you know, there's going to be longitudinal studies by Heather, who's out at the Great Lakes Forestry Center, to kind of to make those arguments. So I think it's been a long time coming, and I think economic arguments are going to make the biggest dent in that, to be totally honest with you. So stuff from talking about the cost effectiveness of green infrastructure and saying it's cheaper, I think that's what's really going to turn heads.
And so that cross pollination between social science, ecologists, the economists, and then all of that important research, and then mobilizing the research once we have that evidence. Anything to add, Erin?
No, not really. I mean, I will just, I guess, emphasize that the guidebook also really communicates the, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of approach, where, you know, sitting down, being proactive, thinking about risks and how they might be reduced ahead of time is way more effective and safer and cheaper than reacting to some sort of disaster that's already in progress.
Planning. Excellent. I have a question that I just became curious about. Rob, you mentioned that community of practice that's co-chaired between Health Canada, which is nice to see, and CFS, like again, that cross-sector work. How was that community of practice formed? Who sits on the community of practice? If someone's interested in becoming involved, or an organization is interested, is it something that's open to new participants? Can you tell us a little bit more about that community of practice?
So to start, like our community of practice is inside. The scope of it is inside the government. So it's okay. Just for our other governmental departments to participate. But what it does, and what we've been trying to advocate, is let's bring together our researchers, our scientists, and our practitioners who develop guidelines for natural infrastructure and urban forests, and partner them with program delivery agents to help provide evidence-based solutions for implementing programs. Now, I'll point to a couple. So the National Research Council has the Climate Resilient Built Environment Initiative. They're undertaking a lot of work on resilience initiatives through different, one thing that we were talking about with them recently was green roofs, green and blue roofs. So that's vegetation on roofs to help counter the effects of stormwater, among other initiatives. So how we can get that research and the value of those sorts of investments into the hands of our programming group, and have a broader discussion about linking science to policy, to me, is the priority of that community of practice. And that's kind of why it's within the government, right? Because we're trying to link the researchers with our program delivery agents. Yeah, that's really where I think we're headed with it.
Yeah, excellent. That makes a lot of sense. I encourage folks to add some more questions to the Q&A. We still have another 10-15 minutes, but I do have one more question also for Erin. Erin, I really appreciated the visuals that you shared where there were climate impacts from Canadian context. And sometimes, especially, 5 years ago, I think when we saw climate impact visuals, they were from faraway places, and it was hard for people to put them in a local context, or to really think that this is an issue here in our own country. So where do you look for those climate visuals, or if there's others that are trying to do the same and demonstrate the importance of their research or communicate to the public, and they need to make that local connection? What kind of visuals should they look for? Where can they look for those like Canadian specific examples of climate impacts?
Yeah, great question. And yes, absolutely. The climate change adaptation landscape has changed so much in the last even just 5 years in terms of the information that's available, the research, the organizations that exist, and everything. It is so different, and there's so much out there. I'm sure the instant we publish this guidebook, its list of resources will be outdated. Like things are being added all the time. But some great places to start. There's climatedata.ca, who are Canadian climate data. I recommend them as a great source of climate projections and information. They have learning zones. They create really nice looking graphs. It's easy to understand. So that's a super resource. The Climate Atlas of Canada is another amazing resource. That one integrates some Indigenous ways of knowing with the science and helps with telling stories. Other super resources, there are regional climate hubs across the country who also present this information more regionally. For example, like there's Climate West, which deals with the prairies. There's Oranos in Quebec. There's Climate Atlantic in the Atlantic provinces, and there are a few others too. So those are really good sources of info also. And those hubs often even have funding available for projects like this. And then also I'll highlight the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as an amazing organization too, who they deal with all community sizes, so not just small ones. They would deal with the large cities too, but they also have funding pots and information as well. So yeah, there's so much out there these days. And then again, the federal government is starting to populate some information too, lots of information on like climate effects on forests across the country, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so much out there these days.
Excellent. Great resources. Thanks for sharing all of those. Are there any other questions? Please feel free to add them to the chat. No? Well, that was really informative. I think I will pass it back to you, Dasvinder, and we'll wrap up a little early.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sheila. So I want to thank everyone, our presenters, Erin as well as Robert, and and Sheila and Kasha for the fantastic discussion and moderating the Q&A. To all the to pretty much everyone who's here, please don't forget to fill out the survey. It's shared in the Q&A, and please stay. It allows us to kind of stay in contact with you. It allows you to provide your input to us. Stay tuned for more knowledge exchange webinars that the CCLM is going to be bringing to you. Be sure to check out our website, our portal, to stay up to date on upcoming events and where you can find resources you need to do the work that you do. Now, even in Edmonton, it is now afternoon. So good afternoon, everybody. And thank you again for stopping in.